Welcome to Books in the World, a literary cable television show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center and by Cape Media. I'm your host, Kathy Aston. Today I'm here with Lisa Braxton. Lisa is an Emmy-nominated former television journalist, former newspaper reporter, essayist, short story writer, and novelist. She is a fellow of the Cambilio Fiction Writers Program and was a finalist in the William Faulkner William Wisdom Creative Writers Competition. Today, we are here to talk about her debut novel, The Talking Drum, which was published in 2020 through Inanna Publications. The Talking Drum is a well-awarded novel, including the 2021 gold medal winner of an IPPY, which is the Independent Publishers Book Award. The story takes place in 1971 in the fictional town of Belmont, Massachusetts. It follows the demise of an immigrant community through the eyes of its main character, a newlywed, Sydney Stallworth. She and her new husband, Malachi, have settled in Belmont to pursue, in Bellport, I'm going to do Belmont all the time, to pursue his dream of opening a culturally relevant bookstore in the heart of a black community. Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you can actually do more justice to this plot because I don't want to be a plot spoiler. So tell us a little bit more about the plot and about Sydney's interaction with this story.
Sydney is in law school when she meets Malachi, and Malachi's a professor. They fall in love. She's a law student. He's a professor in a different department. And he does not get tenure, and he's fed up. He's fed up. He thinks there's racism at play here. He decides that he wants to open up what would have been called in the 70s a protest bookstore back in his hometown of the fictional city of Bellport, where people can come in and talk about politics, the issues of the day. They can get onto the stage, and the little stage, and do some kind of reading of plays. And he wants people to come out and just talk about black power and what's important, how not to be taken advantage of by society. He also feels that the urban redevelopment happening in the neighboring neighborhood of Petite Africa, which will plow over that immigrant neighborhood and put a civic center and marina and upscale condos in, will help their business. They're going to get some foot traffic. But one of the issues is that the wife decides that she decides to support him. But at the same time, he does not know how to run a business, and she hears her mother in her ear saying, well, he's an academic. I was all in favor of the wedding when you were going to marry an academic. Now he's going to be a bookstore owner and cultural center owner. I don't think he's going to know what he's doing. Are you sure you want to stay in this situation? Are you sure you want to marry him? So that's the issue that my character Sydney is facing at that point.
Well, when she begins her marriage, she begins like a lot of couples do, where they bite off a big chunk because they're in a new community. They're trying to navigate through a new marriage, and she's trying to trust him, and she's trying to squelch the inner voice that says he doesn't know what he's doing. And I love your character because you definitely get the feeling that she does know what she's doing, and that if she listens to her inner voice, things go a little differently. The town, the village itself, is right next to where some fires are taking place, and that actually starts the novel off, where you get the sense that people are in jeopardy. But it's told through a couple's eyes, actually a couple of couples, to be honest. So when you paint the picture for 1971, things like the beanbag ashtray and the record store, tell me a little bit about the type of research that you did for that kind of thing, because you must, as a journalist, have had a lot of experience with research and that kind of thing.
I did, but also I actually wish I could go back to my 8-year-old self and pay more attention to what was going on around me, because around 1969, my parents opened my parents opened a men's clothing store in an urban area of Bridgeport, Connecticut. And my father said especially, oh, Lisa, you've done so well on your 3rd grade report card. Why don't you come into the store and you're going to help us do inventory. You're going to count for me how many pairs of slacks came in this box to see if it matches the purchase order. And you can count the ties, and you can keep track of the inventory and what sells. Directly across the street from the clothing store, catty corner, was a record shop. where the owner would, and I think back in that day, that's what would happen. The owners of these record shops would have a speaker up on the top corner of the record shop outside and blast the latest 45 by Motown or whoever, and get people to come in and buy those records. So in many ways, I use the research of my memory of my mom and dad operating this clothing store, and mom always saying, well, Julian, my father, I don't know that you should really do this. He was a factory worker, did very well as a machinist, and worked his way up to a foreman. Don't know if you should really try to run a business, because I don't know if you have a mind for business. And he was someone who had a little store as a child in their neighborhood in this rural area of Virginia. And he would go during the weekdays and buy candy and different things, and open up his store on Sunday when it was not in the 40s, let's say in the 50s. You did not open your store on Sunday.
On Sunday, exactly.
He would double the price, and he was doing that. And he also sold cosmetics and household pots and pans to the housewives in his neighborhood as a kid growing up. That was his dream, is to open up his own store once he became an adult. So against my mother's misgivings, he did.
Yes, you have that entrepreneurial background of let's take a chance,
Yes.
Take the steady job and put it aside for a bit. And also your character is going to, or she's been accepted to law school.
Right.
So she definitely steps back from quite a journey of her own in order to support her husband. The personalities could not be more different. You can see how he's such a he's trusting. You can tell by his, so the characters in the story, like his friend Kwame, who is kind of the mayor of the town, even the unproclaimed mayor.
Unofficial
where he
mayor,
knows
yes.
everybody. He knows how to get you what you need. He knows the conversation to have. And he is going to lay it all out for that couple so that they can just, be part of that community in no time flat. And I think we all know a person like that, where they're just kind of their own mover and shaker, and but it seemed like her husband was definitely completely trusting of him. In general, he was definitely more trusting of the people around him. I know that the conflicts in this were things like trust, and who do you trust when it comes to politicians telling you what's going to happen in your neighborhood? Who do you trust when it comes to your friends who say to you, I want you to do this because it's going to be good for you? And then trusting as a couple. So that was a big theme in this book for me.
I think also trusting someone who you've known your entire life. Having a childhood friend, someone who has had history with you. And fast forwarding to when you go off into the world and go into your profession, whatever that happens to be, and thinking about, well, do you think about the fact that you both have changed over those years, and can you still trust that person, or should you trust that person that you trusted when you were children?
Right.
That's another aspect.
Absolutely. So while this couple is trying to, so it actually ends up to be almost 3 couples that we see it through, and 4 if you want to count the older couple in the basement.
Yes.
So you're really seeing a lot of this story through different perspectives of couples' eyes, and of course the Omar, who is just like, he touches your heart.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad he touched your heart.
He did touch my heart, and so he is from Senegal, and he is an immigrant whose life was really no electricity, living in a way that you were grateful for what you had because you were happy to be with your family eating, and his wife was American. So talk a little bit about that.
I've seen many instances, especially being in the Boston area, where there's a very large immigrant population of people who are from the African diaspora, who really focus on the differences when they're around each other. People who are from the Caribbean, from Africa, people who are African American, who were the descendants of slaves, like my great-grandfather was a slave. And I see these groups together, and I see how they're not together, and I see how one will look down on the other, one will make disparaging remarks on the other, one will not want to work with the other, things like that, and it makes me sad. So I wanted to depict that in this story. So you do have Natalie, who's the wife of Omar, and she's African American, he's from Senegal, You have their differences. Of course, they think differently because they grew up differently. And I want to depict that, and that causes some friction in their marriage. And then you have the neighborhood meeting, where you have African Americans and you have the people who are the immigrants in Petite Africa who are concerned about their neighborhood being taken and the differences that they feel. At the meeting, you see that there's a vitriol, you see the conversations devolve into something that's not very good, and you don't see where things are resolved. But I really want to depict that because I don't see where that's depicted very often in fiction. And I think that I'm hoping that people will have conversations about these things.
Is so true, and it really does stand out in this novel, where you are looking at a microcosm community that is more of a macrocosm life that we kind of picture being more global, but it's happening right in this community where there's a hierarchy of people that are in charge and people that look down at others. And I think you're right that on the whole, people see a black community and they don't realize how diverse the entire thing is.
Yes.
No, that absolutely. I mean, even Mustafa.
Uncle Mustafa.
Uncle Mustafa,
yes.
who is Omar's uncle.
Yes.
And he actually sponsors his nephew coming over and getting started with a drumming school. That's his dream. But he's a tough character. Like in his own right, he's gonna guard you, but then he expects the respect that he is due. You know, so to watch that play out the way that he, especially toward the end, you know, when he felt like I've suggested this, why have you not done it? You know, yes. And so, of all the characters, I know it's easy to say. It's easy to say Sydney and Malachi are the lead role in this, and it definitely is through her eyes. But of all the characters, who was it that you actually had the most difficult time trying to pin down how you wanted to frame them?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, if I had to guess.
I've never been asked that question before.
Oh, all right.
So if you had to guess.
Immediately.
If you had to guess.
If I had to guess, I would say it was Della.
Della?
Yes.
Oh, why?
Because in the beginning, we think she's one way, and then we find out she's another way.
I see.
Like she definitely seems like somebody who doesn't want a friend, but she's yearning for friendship. She doesn't have she again has no, you know, she has a trust issue. She is sort of being led by a man, but she's not, because she's hanging on to everything of her own in a way that says, I'll let you get this far into my life, but I have a daughter to protect.
Right.
So I feel like she was a crafted character that kind of sneaks up on you throughout the, yeah, that was my opinion. Now, was there anybody that you had to struggle and
Well, with Della, I think that she reminded me of some women I know, women in my family, for instance, on my father's side of the family, and my grandmother. Strong women who had their challenges, who maybe they've been somewhat disrespected by men, and they persevered and they were protective of their children. So I don't think that she was that hard for me to, once I dug into my own personal ancestry, it wasn't that hard. People have asked me who was my favorite character, and I would say my favorite character is Omar.
Is Omar. Of mine as well, by the way.
Because Omar is a very handsome man. He's very good looking. He is very built, muscular. He's very sexy.
Very sexy.
So I like Omar. Also, he is
he's earnest.
Yes, he's not the stereotype of what some people feel is a West African man.
Right.
Because he respects women. I'm not saying that African men don't, but that's the perception.
Right.
He respects women. He saw his mother deal with polygamy from the father. He does not like that. He is faithful to Natalie no matter what.
Oh, no, and he's trying desperately to get her back on board in their marriage.
Right.
And he goes to, is it a salon? What is it? Where is it he goes to get?
He goes to a hair salon.
Yes.
Because the owner of the hair salon also sells special herbs that are used as an aphrodisiac. And so he wants to get Natalie's wife on board to have some for lovemaking.
Right.
So he will go do whatever lengths it takes to get the marriage back on track.
And he's cooking her favorite meal.
Right, her favorite meal was what's it called? Mafe, which is peanut stew. And he's a dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
He dreams of being the drumming ambassador of the world. He's
And he has good reason to think he could be.
He's determined. His father has told him. He's been tutored in his village in Senegal. He was tutored by his father as he and his father and the rest of the drummers would go from place to place to place to drum for all the rites of passage, for the christenings, for the births, for the everything you could imagine, weddings, all those things. He learned he was patting pots and pans as a crawling around as a baby, and he learned to play the drums. And his father said before Duke Ellington, the master musician, discovered him, said, "You are going to be the drumming ambassador of the world. Go on. I know that you want me to go to the United States, but this is your dream, Omar. You're going to do this." So he feels that, yes.
And he risks a lot for it.
Yes. So
he risks, really his life.
He hears his father in his ear. He believes that. So he is determined to be the drumming ambassador of the world. Because at that point, very few people appreciate African drumming in the U.S. in the early 70s.
Right.
He wants to change that.
Yeah. And then tell me about putting the character of Lawrence in there. Because Lawrence also was a surprise. I mean, I actually thought exactly what you're supposed to think. So I don't want to give away anything. But he was another character that you could see the kind of, the reason Malachi would trust him, the reason Malachi would want him around, the reason Malachi would think mentoring him was a really good and sound idea.
Because Malachi was raised to believe that you should reach back and help those less fortunate. I was raised to believe that you should reach back and help those less fortunate. And so he wants to mentor Lawrence, this young man, and help him along, get him on the right track, and get him to work at the Bookstore Cultural Center and help him as he becomes a man, because he has no male figure in his life. So that's something that Malachi takes on, but doesn't work out that well.
Doesn't work out that well. It's not tragic how that, but it doesn't work out that well.
Doesn't work out that well.
Yes, exactly. When you were writing this, I know that you're part of Grub Street out of Boston, and did you have a really strong writers group that you were falling back on for feedback and all of that?
At that time, I wasn't, but I was president years back of the Women's National Book Association, Boston, which I'm not sure how active they are right now. And through that, I found an agent, literary agent, and she looked over my work, and we worked on the novel for years. And finally she said, "Lisa, it's just not there yet. I can't represent you." And that just broke my heart. I burst out crying. I was so heartbroken. But then I found out about a group at the Thomas Crane Library in Quincy, just writers who get together every so often to read their work, and I got into that group, just this informal meetup, meetup.com. You find so much there, and they said, this is good, just keep working on it, and they encouraged me, and that was very helpful. That was very, very helpful.
So that kind of feedback, especially when you've got an involved story, because this is an involved story, and yet it reads simply. So you don't, as you're reading it, you don't feel like, it's organic, where you don't have to keep track of every little thing, and yet it is an involved story, because there's a lot of different emotions you're dealing with and a lot of different mysteries.
Yes.
Because there's a couple of, there's probably 3 or 4 things running concurrent with each other. The overall larger story of who's trying to burn down Petite Africa.
Right.
And then the story of what the heck is happening to the money in the bookstore, and the story of is Kwame at all really interested in his woman and her child, or is he more, is he just using everything, for his?
Let's speak of the child, Jasmine.
Yeah, and that's a big story as well, so that she's lived through trauma. So tell us a little bit about Jasmine. So this is Della's daughter, who is 8?
Something like that.
Something in that family.
And she seems like a sweet little girl until she all of a sudden starts freaking out and
loses it.
And just kind of implodes, screaming, yelling, and no one knows why. I wanted to touch on the fact that there are people who can really benefit from drum therapy. Children, adults, people with Alzheimer's. Drum therapy can be very, very helpful. And I want to also touch on the psychological damage done by trauma, by seeing violence, what happens to children. So toward the end, you discover what's going on with her, and toward the end, she does get help.
Well, and that is really, so I've done drumming circles before. There's a local group that does them, and it really, when somebody suggested that we would go and do it, and I thought, okay, I don't know how to drum. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It feels so good to have a drum and actually hear that beat and create different sounds, and just listen to it resonate. And you can see that for Jasmine when she does it the first time, because immediately she has a rhythm. Immediately she's into the moment.
She's a gifted drummer.
She's a gifted drummer.
And Omar is going to get her a scholarship for his school.
Yeah. And then when they were having their grand opening for the bookstore, and the group that the elderly couple that befriends them, that they end up
The Fierce Warriors.
The Fierce Warriors.
Yes.
Yes. And the excitement wrapped around that moment, the Fierce Warriors were coming, and then we hear that that's part of a backstory that we don't even know exists until then, you know. Again, I want to kind of pull every spoiler out, but but there's a lot that people need to discover for themselves when they read this book. When you stopped being a journalist, did you immediately start thinking, I definitely want to write a novel?
No, I started thinking about writing a novel when I was maybe first or second grade.
Oh,
when
all
I
right,
was
so it was always a passion.
Yes, I would read in my room, you know, I would read my little stories, and my mother would say, Lisa, go out and get some fresh air. It's beautiful out there. Just go out and play with the children out there, other kids. Just go out. It's a nice summer day. No, Mommy, I want to stay here and read my book. And I would say, I want to be a novelist when I grow up. And she would say, well, Lisa, that's nice, but you can't earn a living writing novels. And I was heartbroken. And then as I got older, I said, well, I could maybe become a journalist and learn how to write.
Now, you have a master's in creative writing and an undergraduate in journalism. Is that
I have an undergraduate in journalism,
Yes.
master's in journalism, and with the emphasis on broadcasting, and another master's in creative writing. So I became a journalist.
Yeah.
And I learned how to write, how to take criticism, deadlines, be a little bit creative, but it was just so intense and so all-consuming that I wanted to write creatively, but there was no time or I had no energy until toward the end of my TV career. Then I started writing some short stories, and I got a few published. And I said, well, maybe I can do this. And I continued from there.
Oh, I'm so happy that you pursued it. And you see that with a lot of children, you know, going to college now who, no matter how amazing their writing abilities are, there's always that backup plan. You know, I'll do business writing as well, or I'll, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's kind of a shame that we don't put that kind of emphasis where the heart is. Although every road led you here to this, to the talking drum. And what is it that you want for people to take away when they read this novel?
Many things, but the main thing is that we see in the newspapers and we read about, this city's going to redevelop this area, and it's going to be better. We're going to rejuvenate the economy with this. We're going to build a casino, and more people will come. We'll be able to make things better with the new arena or whatever. But do we ever really look at what happens to the people?
Right.
What happens to them emotionally, physically? There are people who end up losing their homes, and they don't recover. Sometimes they pass away. They just cannot be uprooted. Are we protecting those people? Are we losing our history?
Right.
In Europe, when I first went to France in high school as an exchange student, our teacher said, well, you see how these old buildings, they maintain their buildings. They don't knock down like we do in the U.S. You lose the flavor. You lose so much of your history. But I really want people to think about when you redevelop, okay, redevelop, but what happens to the people? Protect them.
Right.
In my story, there are people who are displaced, and there's so-called vouchers where they can move over here and live.
They were displaced a couple of times, like displaced and then displaced and then
The vouchers ran out. They had nowhere to go. Some had to leave. Bellport is kind of like a fictional Boston area. They had to leave and go to Rhode Island somewhere. And stay at like Kadeem, Omar's best frenemy, has
Yes.
to end up.
And that's a good description because I did try to put a label on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He ends up having to go to somewhere in Rhode Island and stay on his relative's couch.
Right.
He and his wife
He
and
and
their
his
3
wife and their
kids.
kids,
So
exactly.
that's what I want people to think about. What
Exactly.
happens to
Right.
the
Well, even
individuals?
Omar and Natalie, they were displaced, and they were ending up. Is it Fullerton? Was the name of the
Fullerton
land?
was the landlord.
And
yes.
right, so now they're in his building.
Right.
And they're afraid to. Or Omar seems almost hesitant to contact the landlord about not having hot water because we're here, we're safe, we're already all
Right.
set. Like, let's not make a big deal out of this.
And she
because,
says, let's go ahead and move to a better place because they're going to knock it down. I know it
and
because
he was certain they weren't.
yeah, he's a new citizen. He believes in the United States of America.
Right.
And he's all patriotic, and she's more jaded.
Right.
So that's part of their conflict.
Right, and then her desire to be, well, she was doing voiceover, but what was her desire? Was it
To be an actress.
To be an actress overall. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And he was being very supportive of it, despite the fact that he couldn't like really engage in that.
Doing his
too
drumming, and making a little bit of
Yes.
money to
Yes,
help
and
out.
he was also cooking. Wait,
yes.
did he work in his?
No,
in-
he was cooking for her.
For her, but he didn't.
He would help. He would drum at Uncle Mustafa's
At
restaurant.
the restaurant. Okay,
Right.
so it was at his uncle's restaurant.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But you could definitely see that he was like, I don't get it. We're fine. Look at, we have
Because he had no electricity, no
Yes,
toilet, no nothing,
yes, and so
and
for
he was
him this
happy.
was-
They would
yes.
sit around at night in his village and just tell fables, and
Right.
they had a grand time.
Right, exactly.
But yet, in the U.S., it's very different.
In the U.S., there's these ideas that we have to have what we have to have.
Yes.
Yeah, at any
Yes.
cost, apparently. Well, anyway, this was really a very lovely book too, because it felt like you were reading history as well.
I want to infuse history in it.
Yes, exactly. So, in one of the scenes when and I don't, again, it's a small piece, but the elderly couple really intrigued me because it took me a while to figure out how they were going to factor into things. Were they just going to be mentors for the couple? And so in that scene where she's kind of needing to be, I need to go back downstairs and she's being helped. I feel like for me that was the giveaway scene where you were kind of setting the table. Oh, she doesn't need to be helped down those stairs. She's not as frail as you think. And yet, there were so many mysteries in it that you really did a great job of tying it all together so
Thank
that
you.
you didn't feel. Do you have anything else on the burner that you're working on?
I've written a collection of essays about the topic of grieving.
Oh, all right.
And I'm shopping that around. I have an agent who's working with me to try to get that as a chapbook, a small, maybe 60-page
Yes.
chapbook about grieving. Mom and Dad, I thank the Lord that they did live long enough to see me publish the book. I dedicated it to them.
Oh.
And Mom passed away in 2020. Dad,
Oh, my goodness.
a year ago on September
Yeah.
20th. So it'll be a year,
Wow.
I think, next
Well,
week.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Dad, we had to put him in assisted living, and sometimes we would be on Zoom because my sister and I were not close enough to drive to see him all the time.
Yes.
And one time on Zoom, he says, Lisa, I read to page 36. And I was like, oh, thank you, Daddy. I'm sure that one of the aides read to him.
Which
But,
is wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a wonderful, enjoyable, really quick conversation. And if you enjoyed this interview, you can certainly see more interviews just like this through CapeCodWritersCenter.org. Thank you so much for being with us.